Well, thanks so much for coming and sharing that story with us. Stories don't matter if there's no one there to listen to them. And so we really appreciate you guys and sort of honor the fact that you're here with us today. So we're going to bring Annie and Amy up here in just a second. But first, I want to share a quote with you guys that I'm read out. It says, this is from a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom, and it's by Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen. Everybody is a story, and sharing our stories with each other is the way wisdom gets passed along. Most of the stories we are told now are written by novelists and screenwriters, acted out by actors and actresses. Stories that have beginnings and endings, stories which are not real. The stories we can tell each other have no beginning or ending. They are a front row seat to the real experience. Even though they may have happened in a different time or place, they have a familiar feel. Stories allow us to see something familiar through new eyes. The meaning we may draw from someone's story may be different from the meaning they themselves have drawn. No matter. Facts bring us to knowledge, but stories lead to wisdom. And this quote is actually something that has sort of shaped my entire philosophy about making films and why I make films and how I get to share them and how I choose to share them, because I think we do a really good job in healthcare of creating facts and knowledge. And that's really important to be able to treat cancer effectively. But the piece that we're missing most often is the stories and wisdom part, which is equally as essential if you're going to be treating human beings and not a disease. You're not treating a disease, you're treating human beings. And so I'm going to talk a bit more about that after we have our panel discussion. But first, let's bring up Amy and Annie. And let's give them a round of applause. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I'm just going to give you a hug again. Great. So we're going to have a little discussion here. This is pretty interesting. It's really fancy. I didn't know we'd have a table. Water. I feel like Oprah right now. This is great.
Without the track pants.
Yeah, without the track pants. So the first question I had, and I know for me this is always a hard thing, because even though I'm 30 years old now, when I hear my voice up on screen, I realize I still sound like a stoner. I thought I would grow out of that, but I haven't, apparently. I still sound like a stoner. So first reactions, what was it like for you guys to watch yourself up on the screen there?
Awkward. Yeah. Because I think, my voice sounds different inside my head than it does in real life. And I don't know, it was the faces I make and stuff are kind of awkward. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely the faces. The faces and the eye movements that you don't realize that you make, and then you see yourself on TV and it's like, oh wow, I look like that.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Strange to watch yourself. Well, just so you guys know, actually, your facial expressions is actually like my favorite part of the entire film. So, and actually, I have one up here. Which is just awesome. If you didn't smile right afterwards, I mean.
Yeah, that's a face of terror right there.
Look at your eyes. It's just like death is coming to get you. And I just loved it. So, you guys are just like a filmmaker's dream. You guys are your facial expressions are so dramatic, and so I loved it. So anyways, I didn't know you were going to say that, but I'm glad I included this picture.
Well, and Annie's like terrified of anything having to do with like
open water,
physical activity. Like, no offense, but she's never been the most coordinated person in the world. So there were a lot of moments when, I knew the brink we were coming up to or a challenge that we were about to face, and I'd look back at Annie and think, oh my God, I think, is she just going to bail, like jump out the boat and like...
I wasn't going to jump out of that boat, I'd die in that water.
Yeah, you see how she was hanging on? She really, like, most people hang on because they're told to hang on, but Annie was hanging on for dear life.
Yeah.
So
She'd have like bruises all over her hands.
I actually
like,
grabbed a cactus at one point, and I had like cactus spikes in my fingers, and so holding onto the rope like just dug the cactus in further. Don't grab cactuses, by the way, it
it's
hurts.
not a good idea.
Yeah, but so like the pain of holding the rope, I was like, you know what, cactus finger, I don't care, and I'd hold the rope and not die. It was good.
That's awesome. So did you guys have any idea what you're getting yourselves into when you signed up for this?
no.
Not really, no.
Well, I thought I did.
Yeah.
What were you expecting?
Well, I've gone rafting before. It was nowhere near as intense as the canyon. And after day one in the canyon, I mean, when you start out, the rapids are really, really small. And so after day one, you're like, oh yeah, I could do 6 days of this, no problem. And then like day 3 came, and I was like, oh my God, like, is it gonna get more intense after this? Because this is pretty hardcore. And the canyon is so beautiful. Like, John always said, well, every time he sees an episode, he says, man, Mikey builds the best sets. Like, it's just so gorgeous.
Exactly.
But the hikes, I think, were probably the most challenging part. So, I mean, there were a few hikes that I only got halfway through, or that I stayed behind with a few people and Annie went ahead and did, because they were
intense.
They were intense. It's not like a walking path that someone's paved. It's it's
Scaling
the Grand Canyon,
cliffs.
yeah.
Scaling cliffs.
Without
Okay.
a harness.
It's very safe. I better say that right now.
It
Scaling
is.
cliffs does not sound safe. But anyways.
No, it is.
Well,
It is.
how about you, Annie? Did you know what you're getting yourself into? Because you signed up a little bit last minute in a way.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
John was going to come originally, but he couldn't come, and so then you ended up coming.
Yeah, Amy's like, we're gonna go rafting in the Grand Canyon. I'm like, sweet. You know, she's like, it's in the middle of the desert. And I'm like, yay, desert, that's warm. So I was like, yay, I can be warm. Water was cold, really, really cold.
Yeah.
Super cold. And I think after we did the first dip in the water, my immediate thought, like coming out of there I'd slipped, somebody had to pull me back out, and my hair was in my face and it was really cold. And I was like, oh goodness, what have I gotten myself into? Because yeah, I'm a couch potato. I don't do outdoor stuff. I maybe camp, maybe for a weekend and then have a shower afterwards. So a week was like, it was intense, and it was every time that a challenge came up, like a hike or something, it was like, well, I'm never going to do this again, so I might as well do it. But I think I expected to spend more time together on the trip than we actually ended up doing, because
Yeah.
So apart from the trip, what were you guys expecting when I asked you to be a part of this film? What did you think was going to come out of it?
That's a hard one.
I expected to be doing this. And not really saying much, not really doing a whole lot besides just like, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. And that was not the experience that I had. And at one point you said that you're gonna ask deep questions and get there quickly. And that's exactly what you did. You kept your promise on that. And yeah.
And how did you feel about that? I guess it says there you didn't know what you were expecting, but it was a lot different than you were expecting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't like cameras and I don't like being the center of attention, so it was like, ooh, it was kind of odd. But yeah, I think, well, there was one day when I got left in front of the camera by myself, and that was really, really hard to deal with. And it was like, just say whatever you feel, and I was like, I don't even know what to feel. And it was after asking a bunch of questions about like life and death, and the deep hard questions, and that was kind of I learned a lot about myself.
And I mean, I was mid-treatment when you had asked me to go on the trip, so I don't really know that much had crossed my mind. I just sort of jumped in and said yes, and then months later when you were first flying in, I remember looking at John a few nights before and saying, what did I get myself into? But no, it was totally worth it.
So what was the hardest part of this for you guys to watch?
I cry every time that there's the episode about Avery, and seeing Avery's face and her happy face, and hearing Amy talk about all of that. And I cried again today at that part, because it's I guess the pearl in the oyster, right? Like the diamond that comes out of the coal. Like Avery is so awesome, and their family is great, and it's a hard thing that she's going to have to go through. And having been somebody who lost a parent and been through like watching somebody deteriorate and stuff, like it's something that I would never wish on her. And it's great that Amy's now so much better, because it's good. Because at that point, there was a lot more unknowns, I feel.
Yeah. At the point of the trip, I think I don't know if it was clear, very clear, but Amy was actually in between rounds of treatment, and so after that trip, she came back and did another 8 months of chemotherapy, and still doing some tests and things like that to sort of make sure. But so, what about you, Amy? What was the hardest part?
I think the hardest part is seeing, like how everything affected John. I mean, you always sort of, it's hard because you see it in your head, what you think is going on, but then seeing it visually, in your face is like a totally different thing. So, seeing how, it affected John, and seeing, I mean, the interviews with our family, I didn't see until everybody else saw when it came out. So, seeing their reactions, I think, was probably the most difficult part for me. And seeing them upset because, well, I don't like being upset myself, and making other people upset is probably more upsetting than upsetting myself. So, I mean, seeing everybody else being upset, I think, was the hardest part.
And do you think a lot of cancer patients and survivors feel that way? They see sort of how upset their friends and family can be about things, and they feel a bit guilty about that.
Oh, most certainly. I think a lot of times, although we see our friends and our family when we're going through treatment, through diagnosis and afterwards, we see one thing, but it's easy for us to turn away. But when you have visual documentary that you see, that everybody else sees, it really kind of forces it in your face. So I certainly think that people feel that way.
Yeah, and so what is it like then, having all of this, your guys' experiences as friends and family members and all like that, sort of up on screen in such a visual way? How does that, what is that like, knowing that these things at the time were so real to you and you had no idea about what each other was feeling? What's that like now, looking back on it?
I think it's made us closer. There are things that are left unsaid, and when you're filmed, they're not really unsaid. They're always there.
Yeah, not left unsaid anymore. Yeah.
No, so I mean, I think it's definitely brought us closer together. If that wasn't possible before.
Yeah, I think it brought us closer together. I think that the first time that I saw the videos, I was kind of like, ooh, I feel really exposed, Like, I felt like, yeah, like people are seeing, like strangers are going to see me, and that was kind of a weird thing. But then thinking about the message that Amy's story is telling people is so much more important than feeling a little bit exposed. And so I think that the raw emotion that you're able to show, and like the thing about stories give us wisdom, and being able to give people wisdom into this kind of an experience was a good thing.
Yeah, I think so, in a big way. And the really interesting thing about this film, to me, one of the most interesting things, that as we, I wasn't involved as much in the filming of it, and we'll talk to Eamon in a second, who filmed a lot of that. But as we started into the post production, and we started watching all the interviews, sort of, and we started cataloging everything, there was one theme that just kept on coming out over and over and over again, and it was that idea of guilt. And it was surprising, because almost every person at one point in the film says that they feel guilty about something. Amy feels guilty she couldn't be a better husband, or a better wife or husband. Sorry. Annie feels guilty that she can't be a better supporter for Amy. John feels guilty because he's not able to be there for both his child and his wife in the way that he really wants to. The parents feel guilty because they don't know how to sort of manage the situation. They don't know how to engage with it and sort of move forward as a family together. It was really striking to me. And so I guess the one question was, after seeing this, seeing the web series, did you guys end up talking a bit more about family roles and the way that you guys were doing things, or did it just go, because it's out in the open, everyone sort of understood that? Did it end up changing anything in that way? I've stumped them.
Yeah, I don't. That's tough. I don't know. Anyone that knows me knows that I normally don't hold back when I'm telling people what I think about them. So no, I'm stumped. I'm totally stumped.
I know that my family talked to me a bit about the series after they'd seen it, and I think that it kind of meant that I had other people to talk to. And one thing that I said a lot was, it's not me, it's Amy, right? It's like, it's not my struggle, it's not it's not my story to tell, right? But when you're experiencing anything, even if you're doing it secondhand, like, going over and sitting and just kind of chilling while Amy's feeling really, really icky, that still, it affects you. And so being able to talk about it afterwards was, I think, positive.
Mm-hmm.
I think I almost sometimes, after it came out anyways, felt like I almost didn't need to talk about it with other people because, it was out there. So I maybe use that as an excuse almost, especially since I went back into treatment. And so, it's hard to talk about that sort of stuff with everybody. I mean, certainly you want to get it out, but you also don't want to say the same thing over and over and over again. So I think having the film really helped to put it out there so that, you didn't have to talk about the same thing over and over. And then it was just sort of out in the open. So people knew how I felt, and I sort of got a better glimpse into how other people around me felt. So, I think it created a better environment of understanding, because then, we all kind of knew how each other felt. And I think it really balanced out how we sort of treated each other going forward almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having that sort of background understanding of each other's stories sort of being out there, it sort of just changed. I guess maybe there wasn't specific discussions that occurred, but it sort of just changed the whole dynamics of things.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Because one of the we did put this on the Huffington Post, and we've been able to share this with a lot of people. But one of the things that I've been doing a lot of recently is sharing it with healthcare professionals. And you guys know that. And actually, on Thursday, I'm showing it at the International Society of Oncology Pharmacists Conference. And I was just informed that they shut down all the other co-current sessions.
Wow.
Because everyone wanted to go to this one.
Crazy.
That's cool.
Which is crazy, because they're pharmacists, right? Yeah.
And actually, one of the guys that was on the trip, Mike Craycraft, he's
Was a pharmacist,
he's a
yeah.
pharmacist, yeah, who had testicular cancer. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, it's incredible to me, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit once we're done talking here. But how these honest, sort of candid stories that you guys were able to share are very relevant and helpful for healthcare professionals to see, because I really didn't know who this film would be for. I sort of thought that it would be for survivors and supporters to sort of open lines of communication so that they could start those conversations. Sort of like what you guys started on the trip, to encourage them to have open, honest communication about things, because that seems to help everyone move through this cancer thing better together. And I didn't realize that healthcare professionals also needed to have open and honest communication and to talk to each other and also to their patients in a more open and honest way. And so it's just it's pretty incredible that this film has really taken on a life of its own. This story has taken on a life of its own, and it's really influenced a whole lot of things within healthcare as well as out there in the community with cancer survivors and their caregivers. So I just want to give them a round of applause for being so candid and open and honest, because they're really, yeah, take a bow. You can take a bow if you want.
I'm not that one.
So I guess I've got one last question here, I think. I guess we sort of talked about what your main takeaway was personally. So I guess what's one thing that's changed in your life since the film, and that can be new life circumstances or anything. I'm sort of hoping you'll talk about your wedding, but you know,
No pressure.
what's one thing that's changed in your life since the film?
You can go first.
All right. Well, in 28 days, I'm going to be getting married.
Yeah.
I actually met my fiance David the weekend after we came back from Las Vegas because Amy had told me that I should try speed dating.
It was time.
Fan Expo, which is a nerd fest, which is awesome. And Amy's my maid of honor, which is really, really awesome. So, yeah.
Wow, there's so much that's changed. We finally we were able to move out, so we live on our own, which is really awesome.
Yay!
You know, Avery started at a new school this year, which, I mean, it was tough because we started when we still lived with my parents and then we moved. So she still goes to the same school, but then she was bused. So there was a transition there, and actually she just loves school. She's just so great. So that really made it easy on us. I think just getting through the winter's been tough. I mean, everybody here knows how rotten this winter has been here. So I think the spring or summer will be really awesome. You know, Annie's getting married, you know, a lot of new beginnings and sort of, you know, fresh starts, because finally, you know, it'll be the first summer in I don't know how many years that I won't be in treatment. So I mean,
Which is awesome.
yeah, it's
So where are you at sort of in that realm of things?
so I have my NED, which is no evidence of disease diagnosis. So when you're kind of in this phase, it's sort of like always kind of keep testing you and make sure, you know, that you're still, you know, free of disease, or, you know, just that there's nothing sort of lingering. I've had lots of different types of surgery. I had my knee done last year. I have to have my knees done again. So there's still, you know, things that are happening. There'll always be things that are happening, but I mean, it's much easier to be clear-headed and focused when you're not having chemo and radiation, you know, pumped through your system. So it's nice to sort of have a fresh breath of air, and to finally be able to feel like you're living life and not kind of stuck in that medical realm all the time. So I think that's sort of like the best and the newest thing.
Yeah, and it was interesting, you know, because Amy had been into treatments basically up until she came on the trip, and of course we got our doctor to sign off and everything. But what a stark contrast, hey? You know, sitting in a clinical sterile room to rafting the Grand Canyon. You know, I think that's pretty.
Which is
incredible.
like the dirtiest place on earth.
Place on earth. Do you
Like-
see the color of that water?
Like it's not that it's like toxic waste. It's just that
just mud.
the current is so strong. So the mud is all, and it's all sand beaches.
Yeah.
Well,
It's just
beaches.
caked everywhere.
Yeah, so
You find
I mean-
sand for like 2 weeks later in the shower.
Oh, yeah, it was
I mean,
ridiculous.
when we got back to Las Vegas from the canyon, I mean, literally every single thing that you own is caked in sand.
Some stuff had to be thrown out because it was just it
Yeah.
was never coming clean.
No. And so, like, at the hotel, I think we sent almost everything we owned out to be cleaned because we were still in the canyon in Vegas for about a week, and there's just sand and everything. I mean, if you think about going to the beach for a day with your family and coming back and bringing a beach with you, imagine living in that for like
A week.
a week.
Yeah, it's the best part. I love that feeling. So hey, let's give these guys a round of applause. I mean, they're just incredible. Awesome, cool. So we're just gonna really quickly bring up another special guest. So Eamon, can you come up here really quick?
Yay!
Yeah, Eamon. He's our videographer and cinematographer, audio guy.
Condor.
Condor.
His name was Condor because he's got like a 12-foot
Wingspan.
He's an incredibly big guy. So here, you guys, give him a hug. Yeah, of course. So just so you know, this is the first time that we've all met in person since making the film. So it's been really cool to reconnect. And I'm just gonna stand over here with Eamon. We're just gonna stand over here for a second, just so you guys can see how big he really is. She's incredible.
That's my
But just about at his hip. But so Eamon, I just wanted to ask you just a couple questions. You know, being the main person behind the camera, what was the most memorable part of the trip for you, of the filming?
Well, I'm glad we brought up the sand because logistically it was a bit of a nightmare to film in the Grand Canyon. It's probably the worst place to. Oh, there we go.
So you can hear his booming voice.
Right. It's the worst place in the world to film, especially with digital cameras. There's no outlets anywhere to plug in. So we're constantly monitoring media and battery life. But of course, it's also the best set you've ever built. So it's gorgeous. Anywhere you look, it's ideal. So that was really memorable, aside from the journey.
Do you want to see my most memorable part of the trip? I have a picture here. That's actually my most memorable part of the trip, you know, because here's Eamon sort of standing on the edge of the cliff, and like the risk management part of me wanted to go down and tie him in, but I have like a really deeply ingrained appreciation of reckless behavior, and so we just took pictures instead. We're like, that's awesome, get some shots of that. And then this is my other favorite part.
That one is my favorite, yes.
He really did not fit in the tent.
No.
It's just, he barely got his torso in there.
Yeah, we
pretty
did a
sure
lot of
that's,
sleeping out in the stars.
Slept under the stars. Yeah,
Yeah, it
Eamon
was
had no
good.
choice.
I'm pretty sure it was that night afterwards when you got out, and I mean, I was terrified. The thing I was most worried about going into the canyon was scorpions, and because there are no real bugs in the canyon. I mean, it's too hot for them to survive. I mean, there's the little fireflies or whatever, but scorpions, I was terrified. So, I mean, everyone was like, let's sleep under the stars without the tent, and I'm like, oh my God, what about scorpions? And after that first night, Amy came out, and there was a scorpion, like, under where his, like, sleeping bag was. I was like, oh my God. Like, I was terrified.
Yeah.
Scorpions are really friendly. They love humans. They love our body heat. So,
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
do.
come on. Don't hold it against them.
Yeah, I shook out my pillow and realized he had been sleeping there all night. So that was nice.
So, one last question for Eamon. What was the biggest takeaway for you being behind the camera and being a part of a lot of these interviews? What was the main takeaway in that realm?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing for me is how close we actually got. And I'd always expected, you know, to be behind the camera and let you guys kind of take part in the journey, the two of you and the other survivors who were on the trips with their caregivers. And it was remarkable, especially when one of us was managing a camera. And again, it came down to those managing media and battery life. And then the person with the audio recorder and the headset really zeroes you in on the story. And there were times that I was getting emotionally engaged in the material and almost had to kind of back away from the audio recorder so you wouldn't hear me cry along with Annie or Amy. And since then I've done a lot of patient narrative films, and they've always just brought me even closer to people than I ever expected. And it's phenomenal, just the stories that we're able to tell. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And that's a perfect segue, too, because we're going to talk a little bit about cancer stories just for a second before we close tonight. So, hey, let's hear it for Eamon and Amy and Amy. Yeah. You guys are awesome. Man, what a cool group. And it was a really cool, incredible group of survivors, too. It was a pretty awesome experience in general. But I just want to talk really quickly about a bit of my story, because by now you might sort of wonder, who the heck is this guy up here talking about this stuff. I just want to share a bit of my story, and then like in the brochure there, talk a little bit about the power of stories in cancer care, because I've been on a bit of journey myself. So that's my girlfriend, then wife Bonnie, now wife Bonnie, in 2008, and that is the first love of my life, actually, Chloe, the Volkswagen van there. And Bonnie and Chloe had a bit of a tension at the beginning, but they're over it now. But I was living in Chloe in parking lot 4 of the Whistler Ski Hill, and I was a full-time ski bum and part-time ski patroller, and I was living the dream. And so most people don't think that living in your van is living the dream, but for me it was, because it let me do all this fun stuff. And so in the winters I was a ski patroller, and in the summers I'd work with inner-city at-risk kids, taking them on adventure trips. And doing some traveling and stuff. And it got even better because Bonnie ended up marrying me, which is pretty awesome. You know, you can just sort of see how awesome Bonnie is because she was dating a guy who was living in his van. I mean, she's an incredible woman. So we got married, and around that time, I went into the doctor because I was having a hard time breathing for about a year and a half. I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I went in for an asthma medication and came out with a cancer diagnosis. And they did one chest X-ray, and they found sort of a grapefruit-sized tumor in the middle of my chest, and it had compressed my lungs about 50% of their capacity, and it was starting to close off my air pipe. And then later on, we found out it spread throughout my entire body. And, obviously, it's an incredible shock being a very active, fit person and incredibly outdoorsy to have a diagnosis of cancer because I was doing everything right. I was being fit, and I was eating well. Why would this happen to me, right? And so I won't go through sort of my whole journey that I went on, but just to say that, there was a point in my treatment where I had to make a decision about how to engage with what was happening to me. I could either sort of close my eyes and wait for it to be over so I could get on with my life, or I could sort of engage and try and combine somehow my life before cancer with my life after cancer. And so I came up with this idea, and like most people would, I decided that I would run a kayaking trip in Southeast Oregon in the middle of nowhere with other cancer survivors. Obviously, sort of a bit of a strange choice of engaging with my cancer experience, but that's what I chose. And I just randomly called 8 cancer survivors from across Canada, and they all said yes. I don't know why. Sort of like I have cancer, you have cancer, let's go kayaking, I don't know why they said yes now, but it ended up being an incredible trip, just like the Grand Canyon trip. And we turned it into our first film called Wrong Way to Hope. And we got to tour Wrong Way to Hope across the country to almost every cancer center in Canada. We did 35 screenings in like 45 days. And we got to do grand rounds and show it at in-services to a bunch of doctors and nurses talking about the young adult patient experience. And, it was such a huge hit. They were like, man, let's do another one. And so we made a second one called Ebb and Flow, Storytelling for Cancer Survivors, to sort of help people learn how to share their cancer story with their friends and family, because that can be a really hard thing to do. And that one worked out so well. We're like, well, hey, let's do Valleys. And so we came up with that idea. And like I said, it's been all over Huffington Post. I show it all over the place to doctors and nurses. And then we have a bunch of new projects looking at different aspects of the patient experience. And the only reason I tell you all that is because, it really came out of that one decision that I made to engage with what was happening to me and not just sort of close my eyes and wait for it to be over. Because that wasn't working for me. That works for some people, but it wasn't working for me. And that one decision that I allowed myself to make to engage with my cancer experience really has made all the difference for me. And ever since that, because of all these films, I somehow realized as I was showing them to all these doctors and nurses that there was things that I was missing, that somehow I wasn't connecting with the doctors and nurses on the same level that I was connecting with survivors or patients. And so I realized I needed to learn how to speak their language. So I went back to school, and now I'm doing my master's in health services research at the University of Calgary, and I actually, thanks, awesome. Yeah, it's pretty funny, actually. My study group meeting was like my study group last year was a radiation oncologist, a brain surgeon, neurosurgeon, a nurse with like 10 degrees, and then an epidemiological doctor, and then there was me with my recreation degree. It was awesome. I was so over my head, but they didn't know. When I told them recreation at the end of the year, they're just like, what? How are you here? What? And I was like, I don't know, but it's awesome. And now I run the survivorship program for the whole province of Alberta, and I get to travel around the province and put on events like this about survivorship with survivors. And we've gotten to connect now with over 15,000 cancer survivors in Alberta. And thank you. But as I've sort of been in this community a little bit more, this is where I actually talk about stories in cancer care. I sort of realized that there's a big deficit in cancer care right now, because we've sort of specialized cancer in such a way that all the way down even to the tumor group, and one doctor deals with one specific type of tumor, and it's very narrow. We've sort of lost the idea of the whole patient experience. We've sort of lost the idea of how things can there's so much more to a cancer diagnosis and treatment than just that one little tumor that's growing in your body, or big tumor that's growing in your body. And there's such an appetite in healthcare right now for the stories of patients, because they really want to know what our experience is like so that they can treat us better. But there's not a great way for them to be able to do that, to connect. And that's where film comes in. And that's why I think film is such a great way to share those stories with the healthcare professionals in a way that they can really gain some understanding of what we're going through, so that they can make better decisions about how to treat us better. And, that same conference I'm going to where I'm showing valleys, they actually asked me to be the opening plenary keynote speaker, hour-and-a-half presentation, people flying all over the world to Montreal. And they're, the first person talking to them is going to be a ski bum, recovering ski bum. And I don't know why. At first I would get these invitations. I'm like, why? Why do you want me to talk to you? I know nothing about pharmacy or oncology. I don't, all I have is this story, this experience, and the experiences of others through these films. And I realized that, the stories are actually the best way to communicate the real patient experience. Candid patient stories through film is one of the best ways to do that. And so that's what I get to do now. But, as I've sort of become more integrated in cancer care, I sort of realized that there's a real lack of understanding on behalf of patients for what their healthcare providers go through as well. And now that I'm more embedded in that world, that healthcare world, I realize that there's just so much going on. There's so much similarity in our stories, but we just don't know it because we're not talking to each other. The person sitting across to us in the consult room is a complete stranger. And we don't know how similar our stories are. And I've been realizing that, as a producer, that's sort of my idea, is to look at the bigger picture and the bigger themes. And I've been realizing that more and more. But, healthcare providers have problems with their relationships too. They have a hard time managing some of the interactions in the cancer center, just like we may have a hard time knowing how to talk about cancer with our families. They have problems with identity, difficulty in identity, and feeling like they're losing control of how they run cancer care. And just like we have problems with identity when we get diagnosed with cancer, there's all sorts of different things. These are all themes that everyone faces, not just us, but cancer care professionals as well. And, and suffering. Suffering is one of the most prevalent ones that I've seen. And sort of we've gotten this idea as cancer patients that we're the only ones that suffer. I talked to a woman the other day who had to give the news to a young woman who had 3 kids that she had metastatic cancer and metastatic breast cancer. And in the midst of that appointment, she just said, "Oh, I've got to go. I'll be right back." And she went to the bathroom and she just bawled her eyes out sitting on the toilet for about 10 minutes, and then got it together and went back into the room. They suffer too, and we suffered alongside them. And I think that's what we're missing. I think we're missing the idea that we are working together on this, and that we really are working through this as a community, as a supportive community. That's what you guys got to witness on that trip, was a supportive community where everyone was taking time to listen to each other's stories. And unfortunately, this is sort of what healthcare has become, because we have that narrow focus. It's sort of everyone's looking at different directions. But also, unfortunately, when you get diagnosed with cancer, this is what patients become too. They really narrow their focus. I had this idea that I knew exactly what every doctor in the world should do. And the more I've become integrated into that community, the more I realize that I don't have the only story that matters, that there's a lot of stories going on. And in order for us to really work together as a supportive community, we need to take off these big tubes, these narrow focus that we have. So, one last thing I will say is that we're going on. We do more of these trips, in case you're wondering. We started a group called Survive and Thrive, and we've done 9 trips now with 120 cancer survivors, and we're going kayaking down the Oahe, and we're going sailing around Discovery Islands, and we're going back to the Grand Canyon in 2015. So if you feel like you're at a stage in your journey where you want to start reflecting on what's happened to you, refocusing on what's important to you now, and then rebuilding your life in a way that's meaningful to you, feel free to come talk to me afterwards, and we can get you on one of these trips. So last quote, and I don't know if you guys heard this in the song, but this is sort of like a core philosophy in my life, and also in Survive and Thrive. And the last song of the film, that's where these lyrics come from, right? I've made mistakes, and I continue to make mistakes, but nothing nothing is a waste if you learn from it. And I've chosen to learn from my cancer experience. And for some people, it's different. Some people just need to forget about it and move on. But there's always that opportunity, no matter what happens to us, that we can choose what we're going to take from it and how we're going to live in spite of what's happening to us. So hopefully for you guys here, you got to see a bit of that in Valleys today, and you'll get to make that choice yourself. And if you need help, come on a trip, and that's what we love to do. So awesome. Thanks so much for being here, you guys. Really appreciate it. See you later. I just forgot that we didn't have any time for questions. Does anyone have a question? Sorry, I just sort of finished and walked off. I didn't really think that one through. Does anyone have any question? I can't believe I forgot all of our questions. Time, but doesn't look like anyone has any anyway. Oh, there's one over there. Oh, she's over there. For the recording, yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hello? Anyways, I can talk, I guess. Sorry. I just want to make a quick comment. My name is Lena. I'm a breast cancer patient. I'm going through my treatments right now, and I'm also a nurse. So going through this as sort of going from the other side was kind of challenging and weird at the same time, because I had to take off my nursing hat and become a patient. And thank you for bringing this sort of all to life and talking about the patient healthcare sort of crossover, because it is difficult for us as healthcare providers. I don't work with cancer patients. I work in the ICU, but I have looked after cancer patients when they're at their worst. And it's very difficult because you don't know what to say and you don't know how to take it. And unfortunately, most of those patients died in my experience. And it's really, really hard. And you want to cry, but you try to hold it together. And so it's just profound that you talked about this. And I'm so glad that you're going to hospitals and talking to doctors and nurses to allow them to sort of maybe learn how to talk about their feelings and how to communicate with patients and their families, because it is hard for us. And now being a patient and sort of sitting on the other side and listening to doctors and nurses, it's just it's a weird experience for me to sort of be the patient and the nurse. I'm not a nurse right now. I'm just trying to get through this. So thank you. I just wanted to bring that up and say thank you for doing what you're doing. It's amazing.
Cool, thanks. Look, you know what? One of the things I say to every healthcare professional I meet, and I get to sit in actually some pretty high up meetings in Alberta, and I don't think they realize that they're like way above my pay grade. You know, like there's no way I should be there. But one of the things we always talk about is I don't think that someone should have to go down the Grand Canyon to experience what a supportive community really is. I think it's possible for us to do that in the cancer center, in the hospitals. I think it's possible to organize things, to set things up in a way that everyone is supporting each other. And I think that's when communities work best, when healing happens best, is when everyone's able to do that. And so thank you. Yeah, I think that just highlights exactly what we're trying to talk about. So cool. Sorry, next one.
Hi, Mikey. It's Debbie Bridgman.
Hey, Deb.
I just wanted to congratulate you. This film is just, I mean, I cried the whole time. I thought it was fantastic. But I've been also following all your films, and I've known you for a couple of years. It really touched me, this. And I just wanted to say to Amy, I met Amy a couple of years ago at a conference, and you said something in the film about how you hoped that you left your mark. Well, you left your mark on me a couple of years ago. You really did. And I follow you on Facebook. So anyways, congratulations.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Is there a question right here? Yeah, you got one? Oh, there's a mic coming your way.
Annie knows is my aunt.
Annie's your aunt.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Let's give him a round of applause. Yeah. Cool. I think we maybe have time for another one. Yeah.
I was just curious what your role is going to be in kind of getting others to learn to do what you do. I mean, that's kind of the biggest part, is creating these videos and these messages that people can take away this emotional resonance. And kind of, if you've been able to do it, isn't kind of your responsibility now to teach others on how to do that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, it's funny you bring that up because, in Calgary, I actually teach a digital storytelling class at the local Wellspring, Calgary, where we get survivors together. They bring in pictures and music and they write a story, and we build a digital story that then they can share with their friends and family or with their doctors. And actually, at the Faculty of Medicine in Calgary, I'm doing digital storytelling workshops with third-year medical students there as one of their sort of elective courses, and it's incredibly powerful. I mean, the people who are the med students who make these films, they start using these patient stories in every talk that they give, and I think that's what we're looking for right now, is to build sort of this groundswell, this critical mass of people who are incorporating the patient experience into everything they do, not just every once in a while they want to hear what a patient thinks about this idea, but to actually have them at the table for every meeting and every discussion. And we're planning a new cancer center in Calgary, and on every single functional planning group, we have a patient or 2 or 3 patients involved, and they review everything before it's approved. And I think that's the direction cancer care is going. And not only is it going to help bridge the gap for healthcare providers to the patients, I think it's going to help go in the other way too. I think that patients are going to start to understand that, there's larger systems and larger experiences at play here that make it more difficult to deliver the type of care that we sort of are looking for. And I think through our voices, these patient voices, we're going to have probably the biggest impact on shaping the future of healthcare. I guarantee you that. And we're reviewing proposals right now for the Supportive Care Council in Alberta. Unless a proposal, we actually have a line item with a checkbox. Did the group consult and include patients in their design of their intervention? And if they didn't, it gets a no, and it doesn't get funded. So that's where we're moving. And so I think you're right. Hopefully, through the digital storytelling, through being at these meetings and just advocating for patients involved in healthcare, hopefully that will be the case eventually. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but great. All right. Cool. Well, I think that's it. I think we're out of time. So, great. Thanks for your question. Sorry I forgot to ask you.